Hi guys, my name is Violet, I'm 23 and I'm scared. I don't understand what's happening to me and I really hope somebody can help. It was Friday afternoon. I came back to my apartment after work to find all of my boyfriends. Stuff gone, save a folded slip of paper leaning against the summer breeze candle in the center of our little round dining table. It seemed so cliché that I almost didn't believe it. The note said something to the tune of, "I can't do this anymore. I gave my portion of the rent to Jerry. I don't want my Tupperware back." I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly. It was devoid of personality and rather unfeeling, just as Chris had become since we graduated. Whether it was the fear of a stable adult life, a tearing off of college's happy-go-lucky veil, or just sheer boredom, I didn't know. Whatever it was, I'd felt it too, and I'm almost ashamed to say I was happy he left first so I could keep the apartment. In the few moments it took to read the brief letter, my brain skipped across the stages of grief like a smooth stone, launched from a father's hand, sinking only when it reached acceptance. Chris was gone. I was relieved. I called up my girlfriend Sabrina, and after suffering through her half-hearted condolences, I asked if she wanted to go out that night. To where? Sabrina asked. Like a bar or something? Yeah, sure. All right. Are you sure you're okay? The concern in her voice was evident. I had never been the partying type, and the first and last time I drank was a Jell-O shot on my 21st birthday. Chris didn't know about that one. He had never approved of drinking alcohol, so I generally stayed away from it. Yes, I'm in the mood to get wasted. I cringed as soon as the word exited my mouth. All right. She still sounded hesitant, which was honestly fair. I'll see you at 8? Yes, ma'am. We met at a place called Macduff's Bar and Grill, which was a quaint Irish pub that Sabrina had apparently been to before. The benches and tables were lacquered strips of wood with all the grain and knots showing, and the cozy room glowed in the orange light of a couple wrought iron chandeliers. Great vibes. I love all that old-timey crap. They served several types of Irish beer and whiskey, but I opted for a mojito, which Sabrina said might be a better gateway drink. She was right. It was fizzy and sugary, and before I knew it, only small lumps of eviscerated lime slices and mint leaves lay at the bottom of my 2 empty glasses. It was around that time that I first noticed him. He was cute, with a curated black beard shadowing his carved jaw. A pair of green eyes flickered between the variety of patrons sitting around him, but he did not initiate any conversations. He tapped absently against a partially full glass of beer, the condensation wetting his fingertips. For a few minutes I watched him as he watched them. It wasn't long before his gaze wandered toward me and stopped. Our eyes bore into each other. The small amount of alcohol I drank must have submerged my more rational tendencies because before I knew it, I was up and walking toward him. We greeted each other, and he was nice enough. His name was Adam. He was in the master's program at the same school I'd graduated from. I'll leave the name out for privacy reasons. And his left ring finger was beautifully unadorned. We hit it off pretty well and chatted for nearly an hour. As the clock neared 11, I made the suggestion and he accepted. I said goodbye to a flabbergasted Sabrina and left with him. It was stupid, but I was in a stupid mood. I wanted to be reckless. 2 mojitos? He chuckled, his eyes trained on the road. And you're buzzed? Yeah, I yawned. I don't usually drink, but I'm newly single. Kind of a special night, you know. I guess so. He smiled. Glad to be your rebound. I held up a finger. Hey, but at least the rebound is the one that goes into the hoop. That is not how that works. Whatever. You know what I mean. We arrived at my apartment, and I invited him up. At this point, I was tired and tipsy, but determined. I had one goal in mind, and if I hadn't been so focused on that, I would have realized that I never gave him my address. The night went how you might expect, given the title. I awoke the next morning to find myself alone in bed, my sheets on the floor. He didn't leave a note, a hair, or even a whiff of cologne. He was gone from my life, and honestly, that's the way I wanted it. A part of me was briefly sad that I wouldn't see him again. But I pushed that away as fast as it came. It was a fun, dumb night. That was all. Saturday went by without a fuss, and it was well into Sunday afternoon when I noticed something strange. It started as a twinge in my gut, not my stomach, closer to my ovaries, like the dull cramp right before your period starts. That didn't make a lot of sense though, because my cycle ended last Sunday. Ain't no way I was already starting again. Fear shot down my spine like a bolt of electricity. God help me, I was pregnant. No, I took some deep breaths. No way. 2 days after? Not a chance. I Googled it anyway. 1 to 2 weeks after conception, the internet said. Okay, that's debunked then. Unless I'm in some kind of 1 in a million situation, but that's pretty unlikely. The answer hit me like a blind man driving a bulldozer. 3 fateful letters. STD. I spent the next couple of hours scrolling through WebMD and Reddit forums, comparing answers and clicking on reference links as my panic rose and subsided in hot waves. ChatGPT told me not to worry. I probably had ovarian cancer, but since I'd caught it early, the doctors would be able to stop it, no problem. Yippee, nothing was useful. Nobody could diagnose a pinching twinge in the lower abdomen after sex, which honestly made a lot of sense. And I could admit that I was probably overthinking things. So I did what I should have done 3 or 4 hours ago and called Sabrina. I don't know what to say, Vi. You kinda did this one to yourself. I picked at a spot of dried oatmeal on my jeans. So you think I'm right then? I have an STD? Girl, I work at Taco Bell. How do you expect me to know? Do you have a gynecologist? There's the one who did my pap smear, but it's been a couple years. I don't know if she still works there. Just go to that same place. I'm sure somebody there can help you. I could sense the thinly veiled frustration in her voice, which was valid. Why was I forcing her to deal with my mistake? I was an adult. I could figure these things out myself. Thanks, Sabrina. I hung up the call and rested my forehead on the surface of the table. Ugh, I hate doctor visits. The gynecologist was able to get me an appointment for Tuesday, which was a bit of a miracle given the typical wait times. By the time Tuesday came around, the pain had increased. It was less of a cramp and more of a pinching, like when you have a zit that's too far under the skin to pop. The waiting room smelled of rubbing alcohol with notes of puke and metal hovering just below the surface. After my many childhood hospital visits, I had become familiar with the unsettling flavor of sterility, as if it were a comfort food. My mother had been a bit of a vicarious hypochondriac. She used my Medicaid health insurance as if it were a lifetime pass to a theme park, driving me to the ER every time I had a sniffle or a stomach ache or even a larger than normal bug bite. It instilled in me a great dread of waiting rooms and hospital beds, that timeless liminality that drove me to nearly Lovecraftian insanity. As I sat waiting for a nursing aide to call my name, I scrolled mindlessly through Instagram reels in an attempt to assuage my fear. I had to believe that this pain was probably nothing, just like the many pointless hospital trips of my childhood. That raspy cough had not been tuberculosis. Those muscle aches had not been Ebola. That vomiting and diarrhea was just a stomach bug, not E. coli. Sad but ironic that COVID was what kicked my mom's bucket. When I was finally called in, my fear of waiting was replaced with the anticipation of a diagnosis. What if it really was cancer or something like that? What if I only had months to live? Did I need to write a will? Looking back, ovarian cancer would have been a blessing. The aide ran me through all the traditional rigmarole: medical history, blood pressure, pee in a cup, etc. Finally, after a bit more mindless waiting, Dr. Kamani arrived. I let her know right away that I thought it was an STD, based on my research. She nodded and smiled and said that she appreciated my input, but she would have to check off her boxes for the sake of a holistic diagnosis. I can't remember all the questions she asked, but my answers in this pathological, choose-your-own-adventure seemed to lead us to one unfortunate conclusion: a pelvic exam. I'll spare you the gruesome details, but let's just say I was more than a little embarrassed and uncomfortable. Do you feel anything strange? Dr. Kamani asked. You mean, besides your fingers up my vagina? I wanted to say, but I held back the sarcasm. What would be considered strange? Could be pain any different than what you've already been feeling. No, I don't think so. I shouldn't have to tell you that this was not what I wanted to hear, right now. Why would she be asking that? Did she feel something up there? I hushed my brain and tried to focus on more pleasant thoughts until the exam was finished. Okay, Violet, Dr. Kamani began, scanning her clipboard. I believe you have a vaginal cyst, very likely acquired as a result of chlamydia bacteria. They are rare, but they do happen. I applied light pressure to it, but you said you did not feel pain, which is unusual but not impossible. I am prescribing you doxycycline, which is an antibiotic. Your pain should clear up in about 3 days, but you can continue to take it until it runs out. Do you have any questions? Nope. Thanks. Great. Don't forget to follow up with your PCP. Yep. Cool, dude. I have chlamydia. Thank you, reckless Violet, for that gift. However, I was relieved to have a diagnosis. Probably a bit too relieved, actually. If I'd taken some more time to think about it, maybe I would have questioned why the pain had started closer to my ovaries, rather than in the vagina itself. Well, the 3 days passed, and despite my hopes and dreams, the pain did not subside. In fact, it grew exponentially worse. The 3rd day, I had to take PTO from work, because every step felt like a screwdriver was stabbing me in the bits. I had been taking those antibiotics religiously, once every 12 hours. But they didn't seem to be doing anything. I was getting frustrated at this point because I really did not want to return to the gynecologist. But what choice did I have? Obviously, this was a misdiagnosis, if my symptoms were supposed to disappear in 3 days. Before I went in, I decided to do a little self-examination to see what I could feel. Maybe I was just tweaking and the cyst was actually going away. If that was the case, then I might be able to avoid the doctor. Wincing through the constant bouts of pain, I did my very best to check myself. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary until I was a couple inches in. The tips of my fingernails clacked against something hard. I yanked my fingers out of there in a split second and lay on the carpet, frozen. Adrenaline pounded through my body, temporarily numbing the pain in my pelvis. For almost a full minute, my brain didn't seem to know how to think. What was that? I briefly entertained the idea that maybe I'd just tapped on my bone, but that didn't make any sense at all. No, it wasn't a bone. I could tell it wasn't a part of me in the same way you can feel the difference between hair extensions and real human hair. My heart thrummed, and my teeth chattered. I reached a shaking hand back down and tried to feel it again. When my fingers touched it, my stomach turned, but I kept them there. I moved my fingers outward. Its surface was rounded slightly. I pushed gently against it, and it shifted. Something jabbed into the underside of my bladder, and for a moment, every part of my insides that was touching this object felt a slight increase in pressure, like when you swallow a too large bite of hamburger, and you can feel its shape as it descends through your esophagus. I yelped in surprise, and quickly withdrew my hand again. I closed my eyes and muttered 700 prayers under my breath. With shaking hands, I called 911. 911, what is your emergency? My voice breaking, I explained my situation to the best of my ability, leaving out the part about the object. I was in a lot of pain and needed to be taken to the hospital. That's all they needed to know right now. The EMTs asked if I was pregnant given the location of my pain. No, I'm not freaking pregnant. Do I look pregnant to you? A loaded question that shut up the 2 men in the back of the ambulance with me. They gave me some morphine, and the pain receded. But nothing could take away the feeling of that object shifting inside of me when I pressed on it. Needless to say, I was a bit loopy for the next 2 hours, while they checked me into a room and hooked me up to an IVA blur of nurses and doctors. Flew in and out of the room, and by the time they decided to put me through an MRI, I was mostly alert again, though the pain was returning. Being in the MRI machine was a claustrophobic nightmare. I tried to console myself by imagining that this was how Ripley felt in the cryo-sleep bed at the end of the first Alien. But that just reminded me of the whole chest-burster situation, which didn't help my mood. Nothing unusual happened during the MRI, and I was waiting in my room for another dose of morphine when a doctor walked in with a sheaf of photo paper. So, he began, shuffling the papers nervously. I'm not exactly sure how to, well, say this, but is there any way you accidentally put something up there and don't remember? No, I replied in a stern tone. I ground my teeth together as the pulses of pain began to grow again. What is it? Maybe it's better if you see it for yourself. He handed me one of the sheets of paper. I took it and perused it. It was a cross-sectional shot of my pelvis. I could see my organs, in what I assumed were their normal positions, though I couldn't tell what was what. I traced up from my groin to where I knew the object to be. An oblong shape rested in the center, maybe 2 inches by 3 inches, pressing out against everything around it. Its edges were gently curved, and inside it lay a strange, twisted form that I couldn't understand. What am I looking at? My voice cracked. We believe it's, He cleared his throat. An egg. Excuse me? It's an egg. We don't know what kind of egg, but it is definitely an egg. And how did it get in there? I sure didn't do it. He nodded. Yes, we can tell. It appears as if it originated in your cervix and then expanded, putting pressure on the surrounding organs and bones. You feel so much pain up higher because so much pressure has been placed on your pelvis that it has a hairline fracture, which you can see as that thin line across your pubic bone. This was too much information. My head felt like it was imploding. Can you get it out? I couldn't breathe. I was drowning amidst a tidal wave of pain and disgust and medical terminology. At this point, I didn't care what it was or how it got there. I just wanted it out of my body. Technically, yes, the doctor replied. But there is a risk. Yeah, well, there's a risk of leaving it inside too. He nodded slowly. Agreed. You'll have to sign a consent form that allows us to perform the surgery. I have to warn you that this will be a very invasive surgery, and there is a risk that it may sterilize you. I gritted my teeth at another wave of abdominal pain. Okay, I grunted. If this is what pregnancy is like, I think I'm good. Very well. He opened the door and beckoned. A nurse clad in black scrubs stepped inside, a clipboard in hand. She slipped it onto my lap, and I scratched out a jagged signature. My hands were shaking so much. It was another hour of steadily increasing pain before I saw anybody else. Imagine not pooping for a month and then all those festering turds coalesce into a rat king that will do anything to break free of its fleshy prison, and the pain only increased, as if the egg was still expanding. I could feel that hairline fracture now. The pressure was literally splitting the bone in two, a millimeter at a time. We're ready to go, a nurse said, though I barely registered her voice. My vision was blurry, and cold air washed against my damp cheeks. I didn't remember crying. The metal clack, clack, clack of the bed's uneven wheels on the linoleum felt like somebody with a staple gun and an itchy trigger finger thought I was a 2x4. It took an eternity to get to the operating room. I reached my trembling hand to my eyes and wiped away the mist as a masked and gowned doctor pulled open the door to the room. Their hands slid under me and gently moved me over to the new bed. Bright white lights shone above me, shifting as they were adjusted to illuminate my lower half. Clinks and clatters of instruments on metal trays. The smell of alcohol and iodine filled my nostrils and I coughed. The spasm sent a jolt shooting up my spine. I cried out. Have you ever been under general anesthesia, dear? A pair of goggles beneath a fluffy teal bouffant peered down at me. No, I croaked out. Well, don't you worry about it. Here's the mask. I want you to take a deep breath and count backwards from 10, okay? Soft rubber pressed against my cheeks and the bridge of my nose as I sucked in the warm, sickly sweet air. I didn't count, because at that point, I didn't care. I only wanted to go to sleep and wake up when it was over. Gravity dragged my tense muscles down until they felt like soggy towels. I melted into the bed and prepared to drift to sleep. My eyes floated to half-mast, but they did not close. I tried to force them closed, but they remained open. I wasn't falling asleep. Shouldn't it have worked by now? My brain sent a signal to my hand to flag down the nurse, but it didn't respond. I couldn't move. The nurse pulled away the rubber mask and set it to the side. She glanced across my face, her surgical mask inflating and deflating with every breath. She's out. Go ahead, sir. 100 screams built within my chest, but I did not have the strength to release them. I was paralyzed. I was a pair of eyes atop a pile of body-shaped mud. The taste of rubber as gloves opened my mouth. A smooth plastic tube pushed itself. Down my throat, an artificial breath gasped into my lungs. Ready. Scalpel. Light glinted off a stainless steel blade. Gloved hands pulled up my white gown to reveal my bare lower half. The tip of the blade touched the skin just under my belly button and drew a straight red line across. I could feel nothing. I was numb. Panic sieged my mind. I needed more oxygen. I wanted to hyperventilate, to breathe faster and scream. I needed to calm down. If I could calm down and endure, it would be over soon. I could have faith in the doctors. I trusted them. Pincers stretched apart the gap in my abdomen. Oh, Lord. The surgeon's hand entered me. It's intact, he said. We need to be careful. Nausea churned within me. I appreciated their caution despite my predicament. The surgeon grunted and withdrew his hand, slick with red paint. Bring them in. A knock on the door. Faint whispers. Two shadowy figures moved into the light. Black, cleanly cut stubble coated his chin. His green eyes crinkled in a subtle smile. Adam. What the? A woman stood next to him, though she was dressed in a long white coat. Her blonde curls were just as radiant as they were at the Irish pub last Friday. Status? Sabrina asked. It appears ready, madam, the surgeon replied. Perhaps a day longer would bring it to full maturity, but I am not sure we could keep the subject under anesthesia for that long. Sabrina turned to Adam and said something I didn't understand. It sounded like a baby's repetitive babbling mixed with the almost inaudible clicking of an insect. His lips peeled apart and a long forked tongue flicked at her. This was beyond comprehension. My mind was lost in the oblivion of confusion and fear, and all I could do was continue to watch. Lord McSheeble accepts. Retrieve it. The surgeon nodded and shifted back to my body. His hand slid into my body's crevice and the tendons in his wrists tightened as he grasped the object. The egg. As he slowly lifted it out, I saw it for the first time. My bleeding skin stretched out and slid down the sides of a sphere the size of a human head, covered in red-stained globs of mucus. Its surface appeared porous but hard to the touch. Long, dense tube dangled from it, pulsing like a blood vessel. It grew taut as the egg moved further from me, and I could tell that it was connected like an umbilical cord. My lord, the surgeon muttered, extending the egg to Adam. What on earth is happening? My panic levels were rising again, and the tube down my throat was not helping. My vision twinkled with colored speckles as if I was going to pass out. But I remained conscious. Adam accepted the egg, not seeming to care as my bodily fluids dripped down his fingers. Scissors. The surgeon slid the blades around the tube and snipped. A quick spray of white and brown goo splattered across my body and the coats of the attending doctors. A deep silence filled the room as everyone trained their eyes on Adam. The faint buzzing of the light seemed louder than ever. He peered down at the egg with a gentle gaze and nestled it in his arm. He slid his other hand to the top of the egg and pressed his index finger into the shell. It crackled briefly, then broke. Thin lines spiderwebbed across it, and the majority of the shell fell to the floor. A gush of viscous liquid splashed across his arms, but he remained still. In the center of the shattered shell lay what appeared to be a human baby, curled in a fetal position. But it was all wrong. In place of a nose, a sharp cartilaginous beak protruded. Flaps of loose skin extended from its tiny arms, cocooning its torso, and its genitals were covered by a slick, scaly tail. If I could have screamed, I would have. Well done, Sabrina murmured. Adam did not respond, but began to open his mouth. His head jerked back, and two long, wet objects jutted out like a crow's beak. A gargling sound bubbled from his throat, and he lifted the baby up, setting it in the center of his huge, protruding jaws. He tipped his head back, and his green eyes bulged from his head as the baby slid down his gullet and disappeared. His hand shot out, and he grabbed Sabrina, pulling her close to him. She widened her mouth, and he inserted the saliva-slicked tips of his bird-like jaws into it. His chest lurched and his throat convulsed. A partially digested arm slid into her mouth and she stumbled backward, chewing roughly. As she masticated her portion of the infant thing, the surgeon stepped forward and received the same treatment. This continued until every person in the room had received a feeding. At this point, my mind felt numb and distant, like I was floating through a dream. I couldn't rationalize what I was seeing. Adam's head jolted and the fleshy beak slid back into his mouth, disappearing. He wiped his lips and without a word exited the room. "Clean her up and wipe her memory," Sabrina said, gesturing to me. "Make sure she's ready, and we'll keep her on standby for March's feeding. Thank you." I awoke in my bedroom, today, and that's where I am right now. I can hear my boyfriend making breakfast just like he did the day he left. The same smell of fried eggs and Spam. I have no idea what happened to me or what I saw, but I know that when I come home from work today, my boyfriend will be gone, and I will very likely have an irresistible urge to go to a bar. Whatever these people usually do to wipe my memory didn't work this time. I don't know why, and I don't know how. If anybody reads this, I need help, please. If they find out I remember, I don't know what they'll do to me. Should I pretend I don't know anything? Should I barricade myself into my bedroom, careful not to touch anything with his bare hands? Cole told me that he emptied the cash register and stole a toolbox from the back office so he could switch license plates whenever he felt the need to in the future to throw his pursuers off his scent. "I don't know how to stop them, but I think I have a good idea how to slow them down," Cole said. But before he could elaborate, he noticed that the sun was shining through the window and we had been talking for hours. Thankful that he went another night without seeing them and having someone he could talk to, Cole thanked me for listening. I didn't know what to say to such a story. I didn't have anything to compare it to, so I rambled on about whatever came to mind, eventually telling him about my boss and how he is always looking over my shoulder and wouldn't leave me alone. As if this was at all similar to Cole's own story. I didn't think anything of Cole asking me if I liked my job or where. I worked at the time and soon I was answering all of his questions. After a short while, Cole thanked me. At the time I assumed that it was because I took the time to listen to him. Then he took my car keys off the counter and left without another word. It might have been 10 minutes after Cole left before I called the police, and all I said to them was that my house was broken into and that my car was stolen. After all, if I said anything else, it might make me look as crazy as Cole. Maybe it was just me being tired, but I was truly afraid that the police would think I was insane if I told them the story Cole told me. The more distance I put between myself and that night, the less real it felt. But then reality set in once I learned that my boss was found dead a few days later. According to the local newspaper, the Whisper Alley Echo, pieces of my boss were found all over his bedroom. Most people in town considered this to be a rumor, to stir up newspaper sales, and I wanted to agree, but it was hard to considering Cole's tale. In the back of my head, the idea of what Cole told me being true kept teasing me. It bothered me so much that I ended up hiring a private investigator, a decision I came to regret because it didn't take long before getting a phone call informing me that my boss's head was found in the middle of another bloody mess all the way in Cleveland. Over the next few weeks, I kept thinking of the story Cole told me. If those thoughts weren't front and center, they were creeping in the back, ready to pounce on a happy moment to turn it sour. It didn't take long before I started seeing dark patches dart from one shadow to the next, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at it. At first, I chalked this up to being a mouse or lack of sleep, since I found it hard to sleep in a house that was broken into. Hoping it was the latter because I hate mice, I bought some medicine in town to help with sleep. It worked wonders when it came to sleep, but did nothing to stop me from seeing these shadows. With an embarrassing frequency, I would imagine seeing Cole's night visitors on the side of the road when I come across reflecting eyes, or think of them whenever I hear the house settle. It was as though toying with the idea of them being real was enough to invite them into my life. I don't recall what came first, hearing my name being called out in public, or the soft scrapping at my screen windows. At night, I will say, however, once I realized that I was hearing these noises, there was no way to block it out. At night, I could hear soft whispers that were hard to make out, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more it took center stage in my mind. It didn't take long before I felt the need to know what was being said. I could not tell you how many nights I stayed up just so I could put my ear up to the wall, but I can tell you it was worth the effort because, unlike Cole, I know what they want. The First night I opened the door for them was terrifying, like losing one's virginity. Even with Cole's descriptions, there was no way I could have been prepared for their appearance, because they resembled humans the same way a shark looks like a minnow. During these conversations, they instructed me to share Cole's story with the world so some of his madness could rub off on others and season the meat. If you see these shadows or hear these sounds after reading this, it's only a matter of time before they come to visit. And when they do, you can thank me, a better and more successful pass-it-on killer than Cole ever was. My father spent 14 years locked behind the thick steel doors of the Barry Telford State Penitentiary located right outside Texarkana, Texas. Recently, I took an interest in the darker events that have happened to various family members and sat down to ask him if he had any chilling stories or experiences he could share about his time he spent incarcerated. Anything that he hadn't shared with me before. It creeped me out. I was already thinking of finding someone else to kill because I don't like killing in apartment buildings. Too many neighbors, you know. When I saw them, though, that sort of settled it. I wasn't going to go back there. Kept looking back in the mirror on the way home to see if I was being followed, but in the 5-hour drive, I didn't see a thing behind me. The next day, however, I noticed a car driving slowly, though my parking lot every few hours. I was smoking lots of weed at the time and figured I was just being paranoid, but the next night I woke up to tapping on the door. As Cole explained to me what happened next, he started to rock back and forth the way I've seen children do in an effort to calm himself down before continuing his story. Thought it was my imagination at first, but then I started hearing my name being whispered from the hallway. When I realized I wasn't imagining the noises, I looked out the peephole. Cole described at least 5 filthy and malnourished faces, partially covered by long, unkempt hair that did little to hide their dark, sunken, almond-shaped eyes that shined with a kind of hate and sin that even the pass-it-on killer feared. They spent the entire night begging me to come out. It was explained that in the building Cole called home, it wasn't uncommon to hear drunken exes pound on doors, demanding to be let in, so the begging went on for hours. Eventually, a neighbor Cole never bothered to get to know but shared a thin wall with decided to open the door and ask the strangers to shut up or something. She stopped mid-sentence the moment she saw them, Cole explained. They pushed her back into her apartment and all piled in. They were tearing through her place for a while and I could hear her cry, which caused them to laugh. If I didn't have number 19's head in the freezer, I would have called the fucking cops, man. Eventually, they made the woman call out to Cole, begging him to come out from his apartment. Cole could hear them telling her what to say. When she did, they would laugh and get her to say what they wanted louder. When Cole refused to open the door or respond, they grew bored and started getting violent with the woman. First, the sounds of punches and things getting broken, but then, Jesus, they were eating her. It was loud and lasted until the sun came up. I didn't want to aggravate an already delicate situation, so I remained silent and allowed Cole to go on for as long as he wanted. Cole sounded like a man who was completely and utterly defeated. It was obvious that even if these people were all figments of his imagination, he still believed it to be true, so much so that I couldn't help but to feel bad for him. Cole didn't leave his room until noon. By then he was confident they were gone and that it was safe to leave. There was no way I was going to stay there, no fucking way. Cole barely touched the meatloaf I heated up for him because he was too distraught. Considering how he looked, I thought he was going to inhale it. After packing his car and making sure to remember the head of his previous victim who he kept on ice, Cole went to some army surplus store to get what he needed to get away for a while. To Cole, this meant staying at a seedy hotel whose main customers included hookers, drug addicts, and other types of undesirables. About a week later, I was getting some grub at some grocery store, just walking in the parking lot and minding my own business, right? That's when I saw them again. Drove up right behind me and laid on the horn. I didn't even bother getting something to eat. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. By the time Cole remembered that he left the head of his previous victim back in the freezer at the hotel, he had already crossed 2 state lines. I could tell this bothered him. At this point of the story, Cole had to take a moment, and knowing that he had a shotgun on his lap, I gave it to him. He finished the food I gave him, so I poured him some milk and gave him the rest of the baby carrots I had in the fridge in hopes that my kindness would be repaid and I could keep my head. Cole traded his car for a van shortly after that encounter because there was no doubt that whoever was following him knew what he was driving. At least I could sleep in the van, right? Saves money on hotels and shit. It only took 5 weeks or so after trading in for the van that Cole crossed his pursuers' paths again. This time he was in deep sleep when he heard them say his name, causing his eyes to shoot open, immediately locking on the dark eyes of a woman with the same sinister resemblance as the men Cole had seen outside his apartment, but without a beard. This woman's disfiguration was more noticeable. When she smiled, it was like she didn't have nearly enough teeth. The few that she had were small and brown and grew fucking everywhere, Cole explained as his dirty fingers fidgeted with the gun in his lap. Like the gums and the inside of the cheeks and shit. Even in the dark, Cole could see their black eyes glow with hateful light, and when he turned over the engine, the headlights revealed dozens of her family standing 10 or so feet apart. Some were naked, Cole explained, his eyes growing distant. It was obvious to me that he was reliving that painful memory. They were standing still, smiling and just looking at me, like they were giving me permission to leave. Cole told me that he swerved to hit a few with his front tire or to at least clip them with the van's fat ass. However, they all stepped to the side, effortlessly avoiding getting run down. When I got the opportunity to ask what he meant by her family, he revealed that was a recent term given to them. At the time, he thought they were demons or vampires, but no longer thinks that's the case for reasons he did not share. After that encounter, Cole abandoned the van and stole a car. It was confessed to me that this was done whenever he felt that. They were closing in on him, usually with the sensation of a tightening of his chest or his balls, triggered by anything from something he imagined seeing in the corner of his eye, to the cries coming from a murder of crows. Zigzagging across the country, Cole made every effort to forever rid himself of these people and the hateful pulse that resonated from them. Cole would stay inside at night, and if he could, he would sleep during the day. He would pass the time by listening to music. It was a surprise to me that he preferred classical considering how he looked. My shock must have been apparent because Cole explained that Vivaldi Concerto No. 5 was his favorite and thanked his mother for getting him into tasteful music. While on the run, Cole would take odd jobs here and there to pay for what he needed to survive. A tractor assembly line in Michigan, a toll booth operator in Florida, and a semi-way station in Nevada. Whatever job paid him in cash, and as long as he didn't have to work at night. No matter where he found work, he would not stay long before, feeling that they were closing in on him and would more often than not leave before getting his paycheck. I will spare you the details of what Cole felt he had to do in order to survive up to this point. Up to now, he had been talking to me, a captive audience due to the shotgun on his lap for well over 4 hours. The night Cole came to my house was shortly after leaving a place he had stayed at for about 3 months, a loft above a bar in northern Canada. When asked why he would want to live above a bar while on the run, Cole shrugged and said that he thought that a bar full of people at night would keep him safe. When they finally arrived, they softly cried out his name from the back alley, under his window. With all the music being played downstairs, Cole had no idea how long they had been calling. But the moment knew it was them, the giggling began. They flattered Cole by saying they were his biggest fans, and tried to prove it to him by telling him details that only the pass-it-on killer would know. Cutting off a head is hard. Even if you have power tools, it's messy shit, man. Took a while before I got the hang of it, though. Cole confessed, oblivious to my disgust. I rigged a bike, pumped to a catheter, snaked it through the axillary nerve until it reached the superior vena cava. It only took about 2 minutes before the blood stopped flowing, and by then removing the head was pretty much blood-free. Cole swore to me that up to this point he never spoke to them, but that night he finally had enough and accused them of being vampires due to the fact that they needed permission to come in. As soon as I said that, everything went silent. I must have been used to the sounds they were making because I didn't notice it until it stopped. That's when someone with a strange accent told me that they were not vampires, but in fact something else. Something that Cole never finished this thought. In the silence that followed, I didn't know what he was going to do, and this terrified me. As if suddenly remembering that he was telling me a story, Cole stopped staring at the wall and told me about how they then cut the power. Not only to the apartment, but the bar under him. It didn't take long before I heard the woman who was tending bar that night warning them not to come closer, and them just laughing. They tore her apart, and all I could do was wait until morning to come. Cole confessed with a shake of his head, as if to eject the thoughts from his mind. Thing is, Canada has some long nights during the winter and I only had enough food for a few days. Cole didn't tell me how long he stayed in that room for, and I didn't want to ask. It was obvious from the 1,000-yard stare that these events were still fresh in his mind, so I kept my mouth shut. When Cole left his room, he saw gore sprinkled everywhere, like a trail of breadcrumbs that started from behind the bar and led right to my apartment. One night a few years ago, I heard the sound of someone breaking into my house. It was around midnight when this happened, and up to this point I don't think I had more than 20 minutes of sleep, but as soon as I heard the window being broken, I was wide awake and looking for my phone to call the police. My heart jumped into my throat when I realized that I left it downstairs charging in the kitchen. At the bottom of the steps, I saw the silhouette of a man sitting at my kitchen table. It was dark, so I could not see him, but the stink coming off the man was enough to curl my nose hairs. It was obvious, even without the lights on, that he was homeless. I was about to throw him out, but as soon as I turned on the lights, I couldn't help but to feel bad for the stranger. He was sickly skinny, dirty, with long, stringy hair that grew in patches and a matching beard. The way he sat there motionless with tears forming in his 1,000-yard stare, it seemed to me that he had given up on life. I was about to tell him to get out, but as soon as I opened my mouth, I noticed that he had a shotgun on his lap. I nervously asked him what he wanted, but he didn't answer me. Instead, he just sat still and stared straight ahead as if I wasn't even in the room with him. This man looked like he hadn't eaten in a month. As a kid, I was instructed to give the homeless food instead of money since they might buy booze or drugs with it, so I decided to warm up some leftovers in the microwave. As I did so, I prodded the stranger with questions like if he wanted me to call someone. He did not answer for a long time and hardly noticed the food I placed in front of him once it was ready. However, once he started talking, he told me a story that would change my life forever. He said his name was Cole Dyer and admitted to killing 20 people. I'm not at all embarrassed to say that I cried and begged for my life at this point. This only angered Cole, who ordered me to shut up and sit down so he could tell me something. Doing what he said, Cole told me that his first victim was a hooker who he choked to death. This one wasn't killed like the others because he didn't know how he wanted to do it at the time, or for that matter, knew that he had a taste for it. After killing her, Cole expected someone to come by to arrest him, but after a while, with no detectives or police coming by, Cole figured he was in the clear. No longer feeling like some cog in the machine, Cole's murderous fantasies eventually took on a life of its own, and soon he started to consider himself the pass-it-on killer. Thue. Reason Cole liked that name could only be explained by his twisted sense of righteousness and questionable moral compass, which was explained to me in great detail. The gist of it was that if he killed enough pests, good things would come back to him. Symbolizing this, he would replace the head of his previous victim with the most current. Realizing killing people he knew was a sure way of getting caught, Cole learned what questions to ask complete strangers to discover the pests in their lives, because who didn't like talking about themselves? Cole explained that he was great at talking to people and could talk the devil into lighting himself on fire, so learning where these people lived, worked, what they drove, and more was easy. More often than not, after finding the person, Cole would decide to let them live because he called himself paranoid and meticulous, always guessing and second-guessing a perfect plan. Since the murders were spread out nationwide and none of his victims had any connection to the others, authorities were at a loss and never even questioned Cole about what he described to me as his hobby. It was at this point that Cole demanded that I grab a pen and paper and jot down his tale. Who was I to say no? Even though he had his hands on the table, there was still a shotgun in his lap. I didn't want to bet that it wasn't loaded or that I was faster. The safe bet was just to write the story he was telling me. While scouting for the next victim, Cole found himself behind a small series of apartment buildings. It was dark while he was digging through some garbage in order to collect what he could about this next potential victim, when he heard a small group of people huddled around someone's basement apartment, whispering to whoever was inside. Cole only saw them from a distance and at the time couldn't see their features, though he described this group as being greasy and dirty with long hair and beards. Even from that distance, Cole could see that their eyes burned like anthracite. One by one, they stopped their hushed whispering and turned their gazes towards Cole. whose heart skipped a beat at the sight. When he went back to his car, Cole dared a peek over his shoulder and saw them following him just out of the cone of light the street lamps provided. Careful not to touch anything with his bare hands, Cole told me that he emptied the cash register and stole a toolbox from the back office so he could switch license plates whenever he felt the need to in the future to throw his pursuers off his scent. I don't know how to stop them, but I think I have a good idea how to slow them down, Cole said. But before he could elaborate, he noticed that the sun was shining through the window, and we had been talking for hours, thankful that he went another night without seeing them. And having someone he could talk to, Cole thanked me for listening. I didn't know what to say to such a story. I didn't have anything to compare it to, so I rambled on about whatever came to mind, eventually telling him about my boss and how he is always looking over my shoulder and wouldn't leave me alone. As if this was at all similar to Cole's own story. I didn't think anything of Cole asking me if I liked my job or where I worked at the time, and soon I was answering all of his questions. After a short while, Cole thanked me. At the time, I assumed that it was because I took the time to listen to him. Then he took my car keys off the counter and left without another word. It might have been 10 minutes after Cole left before I called the police, and all I said to them was that my house was broken into and that my car was stolen. After all, if I said anything else, it might make me look as crazy as Cole. Maybe it was just me being tired, but I was truly afraid that the police would think I was insane if I told them the story Cole told me. The more distance I put between myself and that night, the less real it felt. But then reality set in once I learned that my boss was found dead a few days later. According to the local newspaper, the Whisper Alley Echo, pieces of my boss were found all over his bedroom. Most people in town considered this to be a rumor, to stir up newspaper sales, and I wanted to agree, but it was hard to considering Cole's tale. In the back of my head, the idea of what Cole told me being true kept teasing me. It bothered me so much that I ended up hiring a private investigator, a decision I came to regret, because it didn't take long before getting a phone call informing me that my boss's head was found in the middle of another bloody mess, all the way in Cleveland. Over the next few weeks, I kept thinking of the story Cole told me. If those thoughts weren't front and center, they were creeping in the back, ready to pounce on a happy moment to turn it sour. It didn't take long before I started seeing dark patches dart from one shadow to the next, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at it. At first, I chalked this up to being a mouse or lack of sleep, since I found it hard to sleep in a house that was broken into. Hoping it was the latter, because I hate mice, I bought some medicine in town to help with sleep. It worked wonders when it came to sleep, but did nothing to stop me from seeing these shadows. With an embarrassing frequency, I would imagine seeing Cole's night visitors on the side of the road when I come across reflecting eyes or think of them whenever I hear the house settle. It was as though toying with the idea of them being real was enough to invite them into my life. I don't recall what came first, hearing my name being called out in public or the soft scrapping at my screen windows at night. I will say, however, once I realized that I was hearing these noises, there was no way to block it out. At night, I could hear soft whispers that were hard to make out, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more it took center stage in my mind. It didn't take long before I felt the need to know what was being said. I could not tell you how many nights I stayed up, just so I could put my ear up to the wall. But I can tell you it was worth the effort, because unlike Cole, I know what they want. Tutti, first night I opened the door for them was terrifying, like losing one's virginity. Even with Cole's descriptions, there was no way I could have been prepared for their appearance, because they resembled humans the same way a shark looks like a minnow. During these conversations, they instructed me to share Cole's story with the world so some of his madness could rub off on others and season the meat. If you see these shadows or hear these sounds after reading this, it's only a matter of time before they come to visit. And when they do, you can thank me, a better and more successful pass-it-on killer than Cole ever was. My father spent 14 years locked behind the thick steel doors of the Barry Telford State Penitentiary, located right outside Texarkana, Texas. Recently, I took an interest in the darker events that have happened to various family members, and sat down to ask him if he had any chilling stories or experiences he could share about his time he spent incarcerated, anything that he hadn't shared with me before. I was both pleased and horrified as for the next 2 hours he divulged some truly chilling and grotesque tales. I will just let you know now, that some of these stories are graphic, and if you have a weak stomach, I'd advise you not to read further. For the rest of you, I won't sparse details and I'll lay them out exactly as he laid them out to me. My dad was sent to the Telford unit a few months after his 21st birthday, sentenced to 20 years for armed robbery. It is a maximum security prison designed to mostly hold suspected gang members and violent criminals. Advertisements. The first day is a total shock to your system. You are stripped and cavity searched coming in and out of every room. You have a bedtime. You are timed at meals and thrown into a cell with 3 other inmates telling you the house rules and which bunk is yours. Then laying in bed that first night, that's when it hits you that this is home, that this is your life now. Out of anything I can recall, that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, that loss of freedom, that's the scariest part of prison. He told me that as the months pass, you get used to your routine, you start to need the structure, even crave it. He said he decided to make the best of it, learn as many skills as he could, and stay as busy as possible. One of his vocational skills he picked up was plumbing, and soon became the in-house plumber for A building. Now the way the prison is set up is that there is an A building and a B building. Inside each building there are 10 cell houses. Each cell house contains 12 cells that can hold anywhere from 1 to 4 inmates each. In the middle of each cell house is the rec room where the cells all open up to, and this is where the inmates spend most of their free time. In addition to the cell houses, each building also contains several solitary wings, labeled from A seg to Z seg. When I first got there, everyone kept joking that if I stepped out of line, the guards would send me to M seg. One day I asked a buddy, who had been locked up for 15 years already when I got there, why people kept talking about M seg and not any of the other seg wings. Look, his buddy told him, people who have extended stays in M just don't come back the same. Some don't come back at all. The guards know it, that's why they always fill M last or put new guys there who they think might be troublemakers. A night in M and you'll straighten your act up real quick. I've never been there myself, but I talked to a couple inmates who have, and they both told me the same thing. Something evil lives in that place. Advertisements. So like I said, my dad had become the on-call plumber for A building. He said it was about 6 months into the job when he had his first encounter with MSEG. Whenever a toilet was stopped up or something was leaking, the guards would just knock on my door and lead me to the problem. It was an around-the-clock type of thing. I didn't mind, though. Any excuse to get out of the cell was fine by me. Plus, you get your own cell since you'd be coming in and out at all hours of the night and day, so that was a nice perk as well. Anyway, one night there is a knock on my door and the guard tell me to get dressed, Rochelle. We need you in Seg. I get up, the guard opens my door, and we start heading down to Seg. It's a real mess down there. I've seen a lot of shit in my day, but this is crazy. The guard told my dad as he led him down the connecting corridors. Just make sure you wear your gloves and booties, Rochelle. My dad was curious and asked the guard what had happened. Looney Tune on suicide watch, I guess, somehow must have snuck in a piece of metal. Look, I shouldn't tell you this, but I don't want you to be surprised when you get in there. Crazy cut off his own genitals. He threw his testicles out on the run, but we can't find his penis, and that's where you come in. When they reached their destination, there was another guard standing outside with an inmate holding a mop waiting to clean up after my dad was finished. My dad said when they opened the door to MSEG, it was almost hauntingly dark. 4 or 5 dim overhead lights ran down the hallway but seemed to act more like spotlights and gave off practically no ambient light. He said there was a trail of blood leading towards the back of the corridor. Each SEG block had 14 cells with solid steel doors. Each door had a small window that could be opened and closed from the outside, and a tray slit which the guy must have used to toss his testicles out. As he got closer, he could see that blood was running out from a cell towards the end of the block, through a small gap under the door. "Open 13!" the guard yelled to another guard behind a glass window controlling the electronic locks. When I went into that cell, I couldn't believe how much blood there was. It was on the walls and the ceiling. The entire mattress pad was doused in it. The toilet was flooded up to the brim, and it looked like it was filled with blood. I used a cup to transfer the bloody water into buckets until I could start to see the silhouette of something under the water. I could see a big wad of toilet paper, so I pulled it out and sat it on the floor. I could tell something was inside it. As I started to slowly unravel the wad, all of a sudden I started hearing this noise coming from the air vents. Tunk, tunk. Tunk? It sounded like someone crawling or trying to sneak through them almost. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I'll get back to that later. Anyway, I unroll the paper and sure enough, the guy's pecker was right there. The guard took it and dropped it in a bag of ice, and after making sure the toilet flushed, he started leading my dad back to the entrance of MSEG. When we got down the hall waiting for the exit door to open, all the lights went out. "Shit," muttered the guard. "Against the wall, inmate." I stood back against the wall, my dad continued. And as the guards tried to figure out what was going on, I heard that noise in the vents again. It was coming from the cell I had just come out of. Tunk, tunk, tunk. I didn't know what it was, but it gave me this awful feeling. And as I was standing there, I realized it was getting louder and faster and closer to me. Tunk, 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 tunk. It sounded like whatever was in that vent was now in a dead sprint right at us. The guard was trying to ignore it, but I could tell he heard it too, because he kept looking back over his shoulder and started yelling at the guard behind the glass. "Hey, hey!" Tunk, tunk, tunk. "Hurry up and get this fucking door open." I tunk, tunk, tunk. Just as the noise in the vent got up to us, the lights came back on and it went silent. The door opened up and the guard got us out of there as fast as he could. A few days later, I saw the inmate who was waiting on janitor duty that night and asked him if he had seen anything. He told me he saw them wheel a guy covered in blood out on a stretcher, and that he was screaming about a man in the vents, and that the man had told him to do it. My dad also asked him if he had heard anything in the vents while he was mopping up, but he told my dad he didn't hear anything, but that he found the metal the man from 13 had used to cut himself. It was buried in a pool of blood. The guy said, damnedest thing too, looked like a piece of shrapnel cut out from air duct metal. The next story my dad shared with me is more graphic and scary in the sense of what human beings are capable of. We get new guys that think they are going to be badasses all the time. Sometimes it works out for them and other times it doesn't. There were lots of serious gangs in BTU, and sometimes you get a guy who comes in from a local street gang that doesn't really comprehend how violent some of these big gangs are. It's like they are playing gang to look cool. Like kids play cops and robbers. The problem is that they think other people are just playing gang too or something. Anyway, we had this one guy, Ricky, come in and everyone but him knew it was going to end badly for him. He was this young Hispanic guy, and he thought his small town gang was a direct rival to another Hispanic gang, MS-13. He would curse out and disrespect them in front of everyone at chow time and in the halls, and scream at their members who'd pass his cell. He'd only been there a week. Some of the elders tried telling him he needed to calm down before he got hurt, but Ricky was hard-headed and just wouldn't hear it. Well, one day during dinner, the chow hall was quiet, and Ricky was nowhere to be seen. My table was dismissed first, and as we made our way back to our cell house, we turned the corner to see Ricky covered in blood stumbling towards us, arms wrapped around his stomach. He was completely naked, big patches of his skin cut from his body where his tattoos had been. Both of his eyes were popped out from their sockets and were just dangling towards the ground. The side of his head was caved in where they had stomped his skull until his eyes came out. As he came closer, I could see he was holding his intestines in his hands. The worst part to me is that he hadn't died during it, that he was conscious for every blow and every cut. He just hobbled up the hall in our directions crying and asking, "Why can't I look up? Why can't I look up?" He collapsed and passed out a few seconds later and died right there at our feet. They never found out who did it. Alright, I'll share one more story my dad shared with me. I found kind of creepy, as this is getting pretty long. About 7 years into his stint in prison, my dad said through a series of circumstances he ended up having to stay the night in MSEG. The A building was being renovated and repaired, and as a result they were sending the inmates to stay in Segao, in waves. Well, it had been years since my dad had been to the rarely used MSEG, and he had convinced himself that he was just hearing things that night. They were leading prisoners out one cell at a time and transferring them to the various seg blocks. My dad's cell was on the end, and he had his cell to himself, so when they transferred him, he wasn't accompanied by any other inmates. To his dismay, all the seg blocks had been filled except for M, that is. They led him down to the end of M and opened the door to 14, which was right next to the cell the man had cut himself in all those years ago. Everything was fine until lights out. It was really dark in there. Each cell has a little nightlight thing above the toilet, but it's not enough to see anything or read or write. Anyway, it was so dark I figured the only thing I could do was go to sleep. But all night I kept hearing the guy in the cell next to me talking to himself. The way the cells are set up, the vents carry any little noise to the adjoining cells. The vent themselves are located right at the foot of the little cots in each cell. People would sit next to them to communicate and pass time during stints, in solitary. But this guy wasn't talking to me. He was like he was talking to himself, and it was starting to really wear on my nerves. I banged on the vent and told him to keep it down, but he just kept talking in this whispery voice, and it sounded like he was chanting the same thing over and over, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. I put my ear up to the vent to try and see what he was saying, and my hair stood up on the back of my head when I swear God I felt his breath in my ear as clear as day. I heard him whispering, "I remember you, I remember you, I remember you," in this frantic melodic tune. "Well, you won't remember anything when I bash your head in if you don't keep it down in there," I told him. All of a sudden his voice got a little louder and angrier in tone. "I'll slit your throat. I'll slit your throat. I'll slit your throat." I was a little unnerved, but I've heard a lot worse after so many years in prison, so I just told him to fuck off and decided I'd let the guards deal with it in the morning. Well, morning came, and when the guard brought me my breakfast, I told him if he didn't do something about the guy keeping me up all night in 13 that I would. "What are you talking about, Rochelle? You are the only person in MSEG," the guard told me as chills ran down my spine. That night, as soon as the light went out, the whispers started again, and this time I was petrified. "I'll slit your throat. I'll slit your throat. I'll slit your throat." The whispers were more aggressive this time, clearer too. Then all of a sudden they went from whispers to deep, guttural screams. "I'll slit your throat. I'll slit your throat. I'll slit your fucking throat." It scared me so bad I fell out of my cot and scooted on the floor until I felt my back hit the wall opposing the air vent. As my eyes came into focus in absolute horror, I saw the silhouette of a head directly inside the vent. I couldn't make out its features, but I see its eyes. They were full of hatred and rage, and they were locked right into me. Fast and louder, he just continued screaming that he'd slit my throat as the vent casing started to shake. Now the vents go straight up in a duct to a main duct, then back down to the next cell through another duct, so you can't see into your neighbor's cell from your cell. That meant whatever this thing was, it was right inside my vent. I jumped up and banged on the steel door as hard as I could, telling for a guard. "Help, help, somebody!" A guard came running down the hall, and as soon as he slid the door window open, the vent went silent. "You gotta get me out of here. Something is in the vents," I pleaded. To my surprise, the guard didn't protest my request. Instead, he just told me to hang tight for a second and then clicked his radio and said, "Need an open cell for a transfer from MSEG." He paused for a second, then leaned back into his radio and simply said, "He's back." He opened the door and led me down the corridor, and as they did the whole time, we were followed by that familiar sound in the vents. Tunk, tunk, tunk. I've seen and heard a lot in my years. Not a lot gets under my skin, but I was shaking, like a leaf the whole way out of MSEG. I don't think I took a breath until I walked out the blocked doors and heard them shut behind me. I finally worked up the nerve to ask that guard what the hell was in those vents. "I don't know, Rachel. Warden will tell you there's nothing in those vents. All I can tell you is that whatever it is, it's evil." 2. Part 2. My dad said he had 3 main jobs during his time at Telford. The first of which was as the on-call plumber. The second was maintaining the boilers down in the boiler room. And the last thing he did before being released was to take care of and train the bloodhounds. This first story takes place during his time with the bloodhounds. I had gotten in pretty good with the guards. After so many years with the same old faces, you develop a friendship almost. The guys with good behavior anyway, a lot of people see the guards as enemies and just really like to make it hard on themselves. I myself tried to look at the prison as my workplace and the guards as my co-workers and supervisors. It helped me to think about like that. Distracted me from the fact that I was in cage, plus you were allowed more freedoms when the guards liked you. It wasn't uncommon for the guards that had been there a while to treat us guys doing serious time more like equals than they'd treat a lot of the rookie guards. In prison, respect is earned by years, not titles and badges. As I was saying, I had made friends with the senior officer over at the kennels, and when the job opened up after One of the tenured hounds had puppies. He let me fill the position. I would feed and train the dogs early every morning and again late every evening. They just attached a leg monitor to my leg and let me run the dogs through a big fenced-in wooded area. I would set up obstacles with dummies, going out and hiding them in a tree or in a hole, marking their scent in various places along the way. At first they had a lot of trouble and would get distracted by any kind of noise or animal smell, but after a while they were so good I couldn't trick them no matter what I tried. Sometimes the guards would have me hide myself. I'd climb a tree, jump to another, take a piss on some leaves, double back and double back again, anything to break the scent trail. But damned if they didn't find me. There's not a lot I have done in my life outside of having you boys that I'm proud of, but man was I proud of those dogs. So one night we were doing a run in the dark, which we practiced from time to time. I went out first and I hid several dummies, 4 or 5 of them, and then I hid myself. The object of the game was for them to find me and not go after the dummies which I would rub dog food or pheromones on, stuff a domestic dog would head right for. After I hid the last one, I circled back using all of my usual tricks and found a nice climbing tree where I decided to camp out at. From there, I just waited to hear their booming barks blast through the trees. Sure enough, not 10 minutes had passed and I could already hear their barks closing in on me. At this point, I'm looking around to see if I could spot them yet. Then off a little ways in the distance, probably 30 yards from me, I could see them circling a tree through the fog and darkness. I figured it would be any minute now that they'd be at the base of my tree, letting the guards running along behind them know where I was. But to my surprise, they just stayed where they were, barking up the wrong tree. That's when I saw it, the shape of a man about 20 feet up in the branches of the tree the hounds were circling. I didn't put a dummy in that tree, did I? I asked myself. It was dark when I hid them, so it was possible I guessed, but how high it was. I hadn't put a dummy more than 10 feet off the ground, and this thing was up twice as high. I could only make out its silhouette against the moonlight. I noticed it was shaped similar to a man, but not exactly like a man. Its limbs seemed too long, and they just dangled lifelessly and limp as it straddled a branch, legs hang off either side. Right then, I just about fell off my perch when its head moved and now seemed to be staring straight at me. It started tilting its head slowly from left to right over and over. Then all at once it stopped moving completely before raising one of its lengthy arms, and with a hand full of fingers that had to be at least a foot long, it began waving at me. My heart was pounding. I clicked my ankle bracelet 3 times, indicating to the guards there was trouble. A few tense moments later, with me staring at this thing and it staring at me, I heard the guards yelling out to me and calling the dogs. Off coming from the direction I was staring in, directly behind the thing in the tree. It must have heard them too, because I swear to you it twisted its head completely backwards and stared in the direction of the oncoming guards, simultaneously waving at me the entire time. Here! Here! I'm over here! I yelled out, taking my eyes off the creature for 2, maybe 3 seconds. I could see a slew of flashlights beaming out from the woods ahead, bathing the leaf carpet below in a yellow gleam. I looked back up to the tree where it was, but it was gone. When I told the guards what I saw, they thought I was joking or just seeing things, but the senior officer on duty, S.O. Cheney, said he had seen something too. They radio into HQ thinking an inmate might be on the loose and the entire prison goes on immediate lockdown to do a count, only to find that nobody was missing. While they were doing the count inside me, and the 5 guards out at the kennels just stood there waiting for the okay to return me to my cell. Maybe it was a civilian. I remember one of them suggesting, "I've heard of a lot of people trying to break out of prison, but who on earth would want to break in?" One of the guards asked rhetorically. "Any reports of orangutans escaping from the zoo?" Joked another as the rest started laughing. "Orangutans don't fly," interjected S.O. Cheney in a clearly shaken but at the same time serious voice. He had been quiet ever since we'd left the woods, and he had this nervous, concerning look on his face. "What do you mean?" replied a puzzled guard as the laughter abruptly stopped. "Look," Cheney sighed. "Orangutans don't fly. And whatever the fuck was in that tree, it flew out of there, and it wasn't a fucking bird either." Everyone got quiet, and the atmosphere became uneasy as we stood outside the kennels. Nobody had any reasonable answers as to what it could have been. We stopped doing night runs for a while after that, and when we started back, I never went that deep into the woods again. Still gives me shivers to think about. So this next bit are some things my dad was told by a lifer, and range from more creepy crawly to spooky, but I thought it was all interesting and bizarre enough to share. One of the guys who used to preach a lot in the chapel was a guy named Terry who was serving life for homicide. Before checking into the slammer, he was a dentist. But looking at him now, you'd never guess this tattooed, hardened criminal used to be this little white-collar, upper-class man rinsing teeth and filling cavities. Somehow he finds out one of his buddies had been fooling around with his wife, but his buddy didn't know he knew, see? Well, one day Terry invites him down to the dentist office for some free dental work. When he gets his buddy in the chair, he starts pumping him full of that laughing gas dentists like use into here. Terry tell it he gave him nearly the whole damn bottle. Anyway, after about 20 minutes of breathing in this gas, Terry's buddy is out of it. He is basically paralyzed, for all intents and purposes. Terry proceeds to start pulling out the guy's teeth one by one and dropping them into the guy's throat. Terry said his buddy was awake the whole time, just laughing uncontrollably while tears streamed down his cheeks, his eyes letting Terry know he was completely aware of what's happening. Before long, he starts choking on his own teeth and he suffocates to death. After everyone found out about Terry's case, they started calling him Dr. Giggles. After chapel, me, Terry, and a couple of other guys would swap stories and shoot the shit from time to time. One Sunday, we got to talking about some of the weirdest things we'd seen and heard since coming to prison. Now, Terry worked in the infirmary doing everything from admitting and discharging inmates, to assisting the doctor during surgery, to applying bandages and helping them to the restroom, things like that. He'd seen pretty much every injury you can think of, from rapes to stabbings to overdoses. There wasn't a whole lot that surprised him as far as that stuff goes. Anyway, he told me about one guy who had managed to off himself in a way that shocked even old Dr. Giggles himself. This skinny little white guy gets carried in on a stretcher one day after collapsing and seizing up coming in from yard, Terry told me. He's foaming from the mouth and convulsing something. Awful. I'd seen him around before, quiet guy, kept to himself, never got in any trouble, an ideal inmate. Well, Doc has me strip him down and we start looking for track marks or anywhere he might have stuck a needle, thinking this was probably an overdose or some kind of reaction to an illegal substance. But we search him head to toe and don't find any marks, so immediately we start thinking he must have ingested something. One of the nurses pulls out a syringe and starts drawing blood to run a quick chem test, and that's when we hear it. This noise like a baby rattle, except it's coming from this guy on the table. We all just looked at each other, trying to make sure we weren't just hearing things and that everyone else could hear it too. So anyway, we lean in close and start listening for where it's coming from. The guy still shaking as hard as a 10.0 earthquake. That's when we realize the noise is coming from beneath him. Two nurses flip him over and the rattling, sure enough, gets louder. Doc, I think that's coming from his ass, I said, not believing what I was saying. Doc has the nurses split his cheeks, and right there poking about an inch out of his asshole, I shit you not, was a rattlesnake tail. We had to call in animal control to remove the snake and the local vet for an anti-venom, but by the time they got there, the guy died right there on that stretcher. Animal control gets there and pulls a foot-long rattler out of his ass, and hand to God, the damn thing was still alive. But its mouth was tied shut with a piece of twine, so we knew it couldn't have bitten him like that. Doc does an x-ray on the guy's corpse, and none of us could believe what we saw. There was a second snake, and it had made its way all the way up into his lower intestine. X-ray shows a second piece of twine, too, that had unwrapped from the snake's mouth somehow, and I guess the snake just went to town and started biting at this guy's insides. Doc said it looked like upwards of 30 different injection marks and that he was a dead man, even if we'd gotten the anti-venom in time. Best we could figure is he saw a snake's nest out in the yard, and either he was trying to sneak them inside to keep them as pets, or maybe he was going to use them on someone who was causing him problems, but in the end, all we could do was speculate. My dad told me he told Terry about his experiences in MSEG, and that Terry just nodded along completely unfazed, and then told him about his own experiences with the man in the vents. Look, Terry began, I've been working the infirmary for nearly 16 years. There's a reason the guys in the firm call it Seg de Morte. I've seen more people wheeled in here on stretchers from MSEG than all the other Seg blocks combined, and it ain't exactly like they're packing the house over there, you know? And every time, I mean every time, the air blowing from the vents in the operating room starts to smell like death. Old death. Like something that died a long time ago. Like decay. It got to the point that any time we heard someone was being admitted in from MSEG, we would tape off all the vents. We tried just closing them off at first, but they always opened back up if you didn't seal them shut. I think it likes to watch its victims die. The thing in the ducts, I mean. You can hear it moving around in there, going from vent looking, for an opening, for a hole in the tape, trying to see. We just try to ignore it. The number one rule with oncoming from MSEG is never look at the vents, never acknowledge it when it speaks, and never get too close to it. One time we had a new inmate start working in the infirmary, and it wasn't 3 days before we had incoming from M. We tell him to go tape off all the vent, but I guess he missed one. He'd heard the stories about Seg de Morte, but, it sounds like an urban legend or something, so he didn't take it too seriously. Well, guy is wheeled in from Morte. He had tried to off himself by biting huge chunks out of both of his wrists. We are trying to hold him down to get a needle in him to sedate him, and he ends up knocking the new guy back a little in the struggle, and his glasses fall on the floor. New guy leans over to pick his glasses up and just starts screaming and pointing at the vent he had forgotten to tape off. Out of instinct, I looked over to see what was wrong, and there he was, right inside the vent, staring up at the new guy, screaming back at him. I'm not really sure how it works, but I know when he talks, sometimes he only talks to the person that noticed him first. Like they are the only ones who can hear what he's saying, I mean. The new guy runs out of the room. I just look away before it sees me looking. I know better than to acknowledge him. The vent started shaking and the lights flickered until the inmate dies from massive blood loss. After they die, he always leaves, and you can hear him crawling through the vents back to Seg. After we dealt with the corpse, I found the new guy and told him never ever look at the vents and make sure you always tape them all up. He's always watching, I said, and if you look down at an open vent, you can bet your ass he'll be looking up from it. What did he say to you anyway? He just, said the new guy as he trembled. He just kept telling me to open the vent. He told me to open the vent so he could rip out my tongue and eyes. New guy quit the next day. I can't say I blame him, though. My dad followed up his story by asking if Terry knew anything about the origin of the man in the vents or if he'd heard anyone talking about it around the rec room. Well, I've been here for 32 years now. I started hearing about the man in the wall maybe 25 years ago. I can't say for sure, but word among the old heads is that this guy gets sent here to the Telford unit, sentenced to life for killing his 80-year-old mom in her sleep. Well, first night he's here, he tries to sneak a shank into his cell and gets caught. Anyway, he gets sent to MSEG. This is back before MSEG was avoided like the plague, so it was filled a lot more regularly. Now people were in and out of SEG all the time back then, and they'd always come back and tell their stories about the crazy guy in cell 13 screaming through the air ducts. They said he'd shout in different languages and sounded like he was speaking in tongues or something. Every time his time in SEG was up and the guards go to release him back into Gen Pop, he'd attack one of them, and so they eventually stopped trying to return him to population at all. People coming back from MSEG would say that he would chant incantations and proclaim that he had given his soul to Satan, and he'd brag that be feeding on their flesh in hell. Eventually everyone just took to calling him Voodoo Bob. He was something of an urban legend around the yard cooler. See, by this time he would have been in SEG for going on 10 years, so most of the inmates had never actually seen him. And since there are so many SEG units, only a small percentage wind up in M. But that didn't stop people from trying. Guys used to get in trouble on purpose in hopes of being transferred to M, just to see if the myths were true. And without fail, anytime someone managed to find themselves down there, they'd always come back with a new story about something crazy voodoo had said or done. Now this next part was told to me by a guy who said a guard had told it to him, so take it with a grain of salt if you want. Guy tells me one night the power goes out in MSEG and the control board malfunctions, causing all the cell doors to unlock. But the main block door stuck shut and the guards can't get it open. It was late, so most of the inmates were sleeping and didn't even notice, but Voodoo Bob never slept. The guards just watched from behind the stuck bulk doors as for the first time in 10 years he came out of his cell. In horror, they shine their flashlights through the block door window and watch as the door to 13 creeps open and Voodoo Bob, who is down on all fours, but reversed so that his stomach is facing the ceiling, makes his way out onto the run in these slow and exaggerated tiptoed strides. He stops in the middle of the run, halfway between his cell and the one across from him, and just turns his head to guards and smiles, then continues across the run and proceeds to open the opposing cell door and slithers his way inside. After a minute or two, he crawls out of that cell and sneaks into the next and then the next, until he had visited every inmate unlucky enough to be in MSEG that night. He finishes up and calmly heads back to his cell, legs moving like a swimmer's arms during a backstroke, and closes the door behind him. The guards are frantic at this point. Alarms are going off. Practically the full staff is there trying to pry the door back. But as soon as Voodoo locks himself inside his cell, just like nothing ever happened, the lights come back on and the block door slides open. They rush to cell 13 to detain Voodoo Bob, but when they open the cell, he isn't there. They then start checking on the other cells and inmates, and what they find are 9 bodies and the new benchmark for the word massacre. He'd sliced up every inmate in SEG, gut to gullet, left them absolutely mutilated beyond recognition. Word is it looked more like a slaughterhouse than a crime scene. The whole prison goes on lockdown while they try to find him. 2 weeks pass and they still have no idea where he went. But cameras along the doors and fences show no one's escaped, so they know he's in the prison somewhere. That's when inmates start complaining about a rotting smell coming from the air vents. The guards realize where old Voodoo must have gone. They start pulling down the ducts over MSEG, and sure enough, there were scrapes and claw mark in the ventilation, as if someone had been maneuvering through them. Never found a body, though, and how he got in there no one knows, since the vent cover in his cell was still on and screwed in from the outside, and the ducts going up to the connecting ducts are too small for even a child to fit through. It wasn't long after that people started saying the ducts in MSEG were haunted, and all the spooky stuff started happening. That's the legend anyway. I never met Voodoo myself, and he was already supposedly in SEG when I got here. But a lot of people I trust say he existed, so I tend to believe it. But other people have other theories and say it was already haunted when Voodoo got there, that the thing in the vent is what made him do it in the first place. I heard from a friend of a friend who helped out in the cleric's office that the warden had letters sent out to the families of all the inmates Vent Boy had butchered. He was apparently already under a lot of heat from the higher-ups, and didn't want this making headlines. My friend's source in the cleric's office said all the letters painted the guys who got slaughtered that night as monsters, saying things like they got killed when some inmates caught them trying to rape a female guard, or they were offed when gang members found out they were muling dope up their ass, stuff no parent would want the world to find out their kid was a part of. So he had all the families sign NDAs in exchange for a settlement that was next to nothing. Now, if you look them up in the prison records, it's like they never even existed. You remember that big revival that outreach ministry put on a few years back? What was it called? Oh, that Mike Barber guy? Well, I was talking to Brother Baskins, and he said that he saw the warden talking with Mike and a few of the other preachers that came in after service one night, and that they grabbed their Bibles and headed back towards the SEG blocks. He said he was about 10 minutes shy of starting his shift on janitor duty, so he went ahead and grabbed his mop bucket and told one of the guards he was going to start over in SEG. He gets there, right? At first, everything seems normal, and there's no sign of the warden or the preachers on the run down between the SEG blocks. But as he gets closer to the end of the run, he starts hearing shouting and a ruckus coming from inside MSEG. "In Jesus' name I rebuke you, demon. I compel you to leave this world and return to hell from whence you came," Baskins said. He heard awful screams coming from the vents too. Violent, angry screams. He said it sounded like it was speaking in some kind of dead language mixed with English. And he said it sounded like 7 voices coming out of one mouth, from high pitch to low, and all at once. As the preachers got louder, so did the screams, coming from the ducts, and it sounded like it was moving and banging on the metal like it was trying to get out. "We do not fear you, demon," he heard one of the preachers yell. "We are protected by the blood of the Lamb, the only true God. Tell us your name, demon, so we can return you to hell." He said his blood ran cold when booming out of every vent in the entire SEG wing all at once, and all around him he heard, "Ego sabnac, quod gustum tuo carnes mis dentibus mes." Now I don't speak Latin, Baskins tells me, but the way it spoke, the evil in its voice, I'll never forget those words. Me and Baskins and some of the other guys in chapel spent some time looking up different languages before we even knew it was Latin. After figuring out what it meant, I haven't been able to forget it either. So like I was saying, this thing sounds like it's everywhere all at once, and it's screaming Latin and snarling. The walls are rattling, the lights fading in and out. Brother Baskins said it was like tectonic plates were shifting right there under the floor. He said the room was spinning and he became dizzy and disoriented, and his ears started ringing so loud he couldn't even hear himself think as he stood there alone outside there in the Segwing Run. Baskins said, "I heard the priest start yelling out its name, 'Begone, Sabnock. In the name of the Lord our God, and of the Holy Spirit and of the Son Jesus Christ, Sabnock, you are condemned back to hell.' And then the demon let out this terrible loud cry, and loud bangs shot all the way down the Segwing ducts, whizzing past him, doot dooty doot doot doot, and then all the way back up again, doot 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 doot. Then something slammed into the other side of the MSEG door. And then absolute silence. Baskins told me that for a few seconds there was just this calm in the aftermath, like emerging from the rubble after a tornado, and he just stood there and tried to process what had just happened and whether or not it was finally over. But then the MSEG doors opened and out rushed the warden, Mike Barber and gang, doused in sweat and breathing heavy, dragging out a preacher who looked unconscious. Baskins said he realized the loud thud on the door must have been that preacher, being thrust against it. He said, "They're all coming out like they'd just gone 12 rounds with Tyson. I'm just standing there on the run with my mop." Finally, in the middle of all the commotion, Warden notices me looking as pale as a ghost and just tells me to go back to my cell and not to say a word to anyone. For a good while there after that, we didn't have any more problems out of MSEG in the infirmary. Then one day it just started up again, and we'd get a patient in from M, and the man in the vents was back staring up at us from vents, watching and appreciating his handiwork. After my dad told me what Terry had to say, we just sat back and sipped on some Jack and Coke for a little while. I caught myself feeling uneasy, not wanting to look at the vents in his house. Well, I guess he started thinking about the guys Voodoo Bob had killed in Seg, and the way the warden was able to just cover it up like that. You know, a lot of guys in there don't have any family at all. No visitors, no letters, nothing to look forward to on the other side. No one to protect you from an asshole guard deciding to punish you in their own way. Seg is pretty bad if you're staying any amount of time, but it's not the worst place in the prison to be locked up. That dishonor belongs to the deprivation pods. It's a room with no windows, no clocks, no lights, no sound. The dark can really play tricks on your mind when you're in it for too long. For some people, 6 days can feel like 6 hours. For others, 6 hours can feel like 2 weeks. You lose all sense of time. You can't tell day from night. It's like you just go into this state of suspended reality. I guess that's why everyone calls it the black hole. I used to hear this story about a guard who got killed way back, before I got there. The elders say he was real tight with the warden, and when the local police came to do an investigation, all the tapes in hall where he was killed had suspiciously gone missing from the surveillance room. Just the essential 2-hour block of footage, poof, gone. So the investigation goes nowhere, case is dropped. But some people say the warden had taken those tapes and that he knew which inmate had killed the guard. They say warden didn't want the PD figuring out who did it and prosecuting them in court, where he'd probably get the death penalty. The warden didn't want him getting off that easily. Now old heads that remember the guy say he was one of those inmates that never got visitors or anything at mail call. No family or friends on the outside, no one to protect him. One day, he gets transferred from his cell and doesn't come back. Years pass, then decades, everyone's forgotten about him. Most of inmates there now weren't even inmates when he was roaming the prison halls. So a couple years into my sentence, a pressure valve snaps in the wing where the dep pods are. The whole wing is flooded and they have to bring in an outside company to fix it because of where it broke behind the walls. Well, to do that, they have to transfer everyone from the pods to cells. Anyway, we are sitting in the rec room playing cards, and the guards are leading this shaggy, disheveled-looking guy into a holding cell. His hair goes past his knees and his beard down to his waist, which is already odd because there are strict dress codes when it comes to grooming. This guy is pale too. He has the complexion of printer paper, and across his forehead he has this big tattoo that says Ricky. One of the elders I'm playing cards with looks up and with a confused look on his face says, "What the fuck? Is that Ricky?" "You know him?" I asked. I think so, but it can't be the same person, can it? Ricky goes into his cell and he just starts screaming, but he was talking almost like a toddler, like someone that was just learning how to talk, or like a deaf person might. "Who's that old man? Who's that old man?" We jumped up from the table and went over to see what was wrong, and he was weeping, looking in the mirror, asking who that old man was. "Ricky. Ricky, it's me, Tommy Keene. Do you remember me?" No, Tommy Keene was young. You're too old to be Tommy." He was crying inconsolably, but finally we calmed him down enough to speak, and Tommy asked him where he'd been. Boridai told us he'd been in the dark, floating through space with a nice gray man, and that's all he could remember. I asked Tommy when was the last time he'd seen Ricky. Tommy told me it had to have been at least 30 years. We started to piece together what had happened to Ricky, and taking into account the work being done in the depth pods, and his long hair and disheveled appearance, we had a pretty good idea. Ricky had been locked up in the black hole, in the quiet, in the dark, alone for the 3 decades. Seeing himself in the mirror for the first time in 30 years, he didn't recognize himself. He didn't realize how long he'd been gone. His speech was out of practice with only himself to talk to, and everyone he used to know was either all of a sudden old or dead. All day he kept pleading with us to take him back to space, that he just wanted to go back to space, back to the gray man. Ricky hung himself with his bed sheets that night. It was all just too much for the guy. We got on the subject of prison escapes, and I asked him if anyone had ever escaped while he was there. A few guys wrapped themselves in cardboard and made it over the razor wire fence one time. They get caught after a couple of weeks, but not before they broke into a house in a nearby town, killing the husband and raping the wife and daughter before killing them too. I mean, there are at least 15 to 20 serious escape attempts a year. Most of them don't make it past the prison doors, and even if they do, they always get caught eventually. I remember one night though, when I was out with the guards. At the kennels, the alarm started going off. When that happens, the protocol for inmates is to drop to the ground immediately wherever they are and lay on their stomachs until the sirens stop. So there I am, laying outside on the dirt, looking ahead to the tree line in the distance where I would run the dogs. Then this cracking noise starts moving across the trees. I see branches popping, and it's going from one tree to the next, and I can see the treetops swaying like something big was moving through them. It does that a good 5 minutes, and then from the woods I hear this guy start screaming bloody murder. Sounded like he was in pain, and a lot of it at that. And I could have swore I heard someone else start screaming too along with him in this high-pitched screech. But I've heard people making some horrible noises when they're injured bad enough, so I thought maybe it was all the same guy. While this guy is screaming out there in the woods, all the guards and dogs take off into the trees except for 2 that stayed behind to watch me. Eventually I hear the dogs barking the way they bark when they tree something. Then I hear one of the guards' radios go off, and from the other end it's one of the officers that ran into the woods. I need a medic, and the tallest bucket lift we got out to the kennel area. And maybe a chainsaw. Bucket lift? A baffled voice responded. Affirmative, we've located the fugitive. He's impaled on a tree about 40 feet up. Gonna need something tall to get him down. I got escorted back to my cell right after that, so I didn't see what happened next. But I asked Dr. Giggles if he was working when they'd brought the guy into the infirmary that night. He told that he was on shift when they'd brought him in, and that he had a large branch impaled all the way through both sides of his thigh, where they'd had to use the chainsaw to cut him free. He said the guy was still alive, still awake even. And after the doctor removed the limb and had him stable enough to talk sensibly, he asked him how it happened, and the guy said, "I was running to the fence when all of the trees just started snapping, and something picked me up and carried me off into the sky. It all happened so fast, and before I knew what hit me, I was looking down to treetops, and we were going even higher. Fuck, man, I thought it was going to carry me clear up into the clouds, Bob. But then I heard the alarm start going off, and it let me go. I must have passed out when I hit trees. At some point I woke up the thing. The thing was just floating. There, staring at my leg and picking at it, I started screaming, and then it screamed too. But when it heard the dogs coming, it flew off, snapping back through the trees. Terry thought the guy was just making it all up, but I believe him. I think it was the same thing me and S.O. Cheney saw that night we were running the hounds. I'll finish up this post with a story from within the dark corridor of MSEG. This one is from a fellow inmate who my dad called Seven, that had found himself there a couple weeks into his sentence. I'll tell it to you as if I'm Seven, telling my dad. When I first got to the Telford unit, I was a disrespectful young prick. I had a bold hatred towards authority, and like an idiot I assaulted a guard. Well, to teach me a lesson, they tossed me an M. Whatever, no big deal, I thought. Well, nighttime hits and I start feeling antsy all of a sudden, like something's off, but I can't quite place it. Anyway, I think fuck it and try to get some sleep. It must have been 2, maybe 3 a.m. when I first noticed the smell. It was this thick, god-awful stench, like burnt hair mixed with spoiled meat, and I'm freezing. Now I'm talking middle of June in Texas, and I'm so cold I can see my breath. All I can figure is that it must be coming from the vent, so I pull the pillowcase off my pillow and drape it over the vent cover. Lay back down, and after a minute, it's cold again. I look and the pillowcase isn't on the vent anymore. Not only that, but it wasn't even near the vent. It was all the way across the room by the toilet. I was a little unnerved, but figured it was probably a rat or something. Dragging it off, so I get up, drape it back on, and as soon as I turn around, up foop, and I hear it hit the wall across from me. I look down at the vent and I see this guy looking up at me, and as soon as I see him, he ducks his head out of sight, and I hear him shimmy up the vent, and it sounds like he stops in the next cell over. I was a little startled for a minute, but then I just started getting pissed. This was before I'd heard anything about MSEG and man in the vents, so I'm thinking the guy next door is fucking with me, disrespecting me. I got you, bitch, I shout at him through the vent. For the next 30 minutes, I'm down there using my thumbnail to try and unscrew the screws on the vent cover. I get 2 of them off, and this motherfucker pops his head down from the ducts and is staring at me hanging upside down, then pops his head out of sight again. It was too dark to make out his features, but his eyes seemed so clear and visible, almost like they were glowing or something, and the outline of his face was all sunken in. So I thought, this is just little guy, and that I could take him easily. Next time he sticks his head down, I'll grab him by the hair and pull him down, I thought. Couple minutes go by, I have the vent pulled back and where I took out the 2 screws, and I'm just waiting for my opportunity. Then I hear something moving my way from the cell beside me in these short, quick, sporadic bursts. Tink, 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 tink. It moved from the duct above the neighboring cell and then straight down the duct right inside my wall and stopped right before the vent opening. Then, as fast as a snake strike, he popped his head down into view, and I reflexively launched for his hair as he opened his mouth as wide as he could and let out this deep and constant scream. I tried to pull back, but my momentum carried me forward, my arm now fully inside the vent. His eyes quickly changed from this look of curiosity to absolute rage as he raised his head back up and quickly shot his arm down, grabbing mine. He pulled so hard I felt my shoulder leave its socket. I twisted around until I was laying flat. On my back, my left arm now being pulled all the way inside the duct up to my armpit. He's yelling things at me now. You fuck. You stupid fuck. I'll rip you limb to limb. I'll eat your fucking eyes, you stupid fuck. He's screaming with such anger and yanking my arm so violently, I start to think he's gonna pull it right off. I'm just bouncing off the ground and against the wall like a rag doll as he tugs. The guards must have heard me slamming against the wall because they come stampeding down the run, as I don't think I had said a word up to this point. I was in shock, I suppose. But as soon as I see the guards open the door, I start yelling, "Help, help, get it off me, get it off me." Then I hear this thing in wall start fucking mocking me in this whiny voice before going back to angry again. "Get it off me, get it off me." It mocked, then began screaming again. "You fuck, you stupid fucking bitch." "Don't talk back to it," one of the guards warned me. I feel this sharp pain shoot up my arm, and when the thing goes quiet for a minute, I realize it's chewing on my fingers, and I feel this hard crunch and the sound of bones shattering to dust in its teeth. The 3 guards are down on the ground trying to pry me out of its grip, but it's no use. It has me, and it's not letting go. Right before I pass out, I see one of the on-call ministers run in. He puts a crucifix against the wall, and the thing releases my arm. I see the preacher man slide the crucifix up along the wall where the vent runs and hear the thing scooting upwards and back away from it. The guards pull me out and I lose consciousness. Next day I wake up in the infirmary missing 3 fingers and had a dislocated shoulder. I remember feeling like the vent was too small for a person to fit in when my arm was inside it, except for where he was. Wherever he was, it felt bigger, like the vent expanded around him. I don't know how to explain it. Anyway, long story short, I've learned to mind my P's and Q's since then. Part 3 suffice to say my dad's fellow inmate had some interesting tales of events that took place after my dad was paroled. Like I said, he's the guy that took over training the bloodhounds after my dad, and a lot of his stories dealt with the creature inhabiting the woods by the kennels. I'll start this off with a story Mark, my dad's friend, was told by one of his friends after having his own run-in with the creature one night. This is what Mark was told. A new guard tower was being built at the edge of the property where the warden figured security was a bit vulnerable. It was right outside the woods where they trained the search dogs, and a crude path just wide, enough for a van carrying a work convoy, was cut right through the trees. Well, they started bringing us out there in a chain gang every night about 3 to 4 a.m. to dig a ditch for the plumbing and electrical from the tower to the main campus. They'd have me and about 9 more inmates digging out there until around noon when it started to get too hot in the Texas sun. Anyway, one night we load up in the convoy and start headed that way, and out of nowhere it starts pouring cats and dogs. We tried digging for about 30 minutes, but the ground had turned to mush and we're just making a mess, so the SO tells us to load back up on the van. There were 2 chain gangs out there that night, Chain 1 and Chain 2, 5 inmates, on each chain shackled up at the ankle. Well, the guys on Chain 1 get in the van and me and the guys on Chain 2 are standing there in this torrential downpour, waiting for the signal to board when the treetops directly beside us start shaking and branches start snapping and cracking. We all hear it and start looking up at the trees trying to figure out what the hell is up there. But before we see anything, the guards usher us inside the van. Get inside, take our seats, and the driver starts the engine. But by now the whole trail we came in on is nothing but mud and we ain't moving. A guard steps out, walks around the vehicle and step back in. He tells the driver the tires are all down in the ground halfway up the rims in muck and we'd need a tow truck to get out. But until the path dried up, there wasn't any way to get a tow out there, so they radio inside and were told to just hang tight. About that time, one of the guys in the seat behind mine starts spouting off and pointing out the window up at one of the trees. What the fuck is in that tree? Over there. Look. The whole van looks to see what this guy is pointing at, and in the thick, gnarled branches of a tree about 20 yards off are these glowing yellow eyes just watching us. Now the van is in an uproar, yelling at the guards to get us the fuck out of there. You know, you get hardened to violence and stop fearing the physical. But most of the guys that are locked up for a good chunk are petrified of the dark, of the things that lurk there. Even if you didn't believe in ghoulies and goblins, when you come prison, you get left alone to face your inner demons long enough and you realize they must have come from somewhere. So everyone is in a panic, acting like a lady that's seen a mouse, but the guards yell at us to sit down and shut up. We're in a staring contest with the eyes in the tree when they slowly pull back into the void and disappear. Not a second later, on the roof of the van, doof, a loud thud hits us as the van quakes from the impact. Everybody hits the ground, and there is absolute silence. Then we hear cree, 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 as whatever was on the roof started walking back and forth from the front of the van to back. "What the fuck is up there?" sheepishly whispers the guy shackled next to me. The SO just looks at him and slowly puts his finger to his lips, silently shushing him, never taking his eyes off the van ceiling. Everyone is looking around at each other in this thick, tense atmosphere, too afraid to hardly breathe. Then the thing on the roof lets out this ear-piercing screech and then starts rocking the van so violently I thought it was going to tip us over. The guys on Chain 1 start looking frantically at each other. "Fuck this," one of them shouts. They all jump up and bolt for the exit, guards in a half whisper, half yell, telling them to get back on the floor. But before they can do anything about it, the guys on Chain 1 force the door open and dart outside. The van stops shaking immediately and we get up and look out the window to see what's going on. All I saw was this dark blur swooping down at the guys on Chain 1 who were running back towards the prison. And I watched as in a flash the whole fucking chain gang gets yanked sideways 15 feet into the trees. It was like something just sucked them up. One second they were there and the next they were gone. Shit, 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 god damn it. The SO starts ranting. Everything goes quiet again. SO is trying to figure out if he should call in to report the incident and missing inmates yet or not, probably thinking they'd make him get off the van and go after them if he did. Finally, he clicks in his radio. "This is SO Davis. We got a problem out here at Tower 8. Roger, SO Davis. This is HQ. Go ahead with your issue. Over." Right about that time, the guys on chain 1 come running out from trees, as white as ghosts, screaming for the driver to open the van doors. As they get closer, we can see that there were only 4 men on the chain, and that the lead man, Barnes, was missing. And when they got right up to the van, we could see that still shackled and dangling from where Barnes was cuffed was his leg all the way up to the knee. "So, Davis, go ahead with your issue. Over." "S.O. Davis," repeated the voice in the radio. Hesitantly, he clicked the button on the radio. "S.O. Davis here. Gonna need a search party for an injured inmate missing in the woods by 8. Over." "Roger that, S.O. Davis, over." A second later, the sirens start going off as the driver opens the door, and the 4 inmates still on the chain run inside. One of the guards unlocks the Barnes's leg from the shackles and just tosses it outside the door. None of them spoke a word as we just sat there nervously locked inside the van. We could hear the hounds start barking from within the woods and officers shouting to one another as flashlight beams danced in and out of sight. A couple hours pass, and then S.O. Davis's walkie goes off, and the voice of a distraught guard comes through. This is, Officer Martinez. I have located the missing inmate. Well, some of him." Just like that, the sirens stop ringing and the prison comes off lockdown. We were instructed to wait on board the van until sunrise, and then were escorted back to our housing units when it was light enough to safely walk the mile or so to main campus. One of the inmates on chain 1 lived in the same unit as me, and when I saw him in rec later that day, I asked what the hell had happened out there. I'm not really sure," he began. This fucking thing, it just dragged us through the brush like we were nothing and started pulling us up into the air so fast I started blacking out. It had a hold of Barnes, and it yanked him so hard through the branches that he hit a limb and it ripped his leg right from his body. The rest of us just start falling back to ground, and I can see it carrying him off into the canopy of leaves and just vanish. I don't think it even noticed it wasn't holding us anymore. "Jesus Christ," I said, horrified. "Did you catch a good look at it?" I wish to God I hadn't. It was 9, maybe 10 feet tall and thin, anorexic almost. I didn't see its face, but from the back of its head I saw its long, wiry gray hair whipping through the wind. Its arms hung down all the way past its knees, and it had these spiny fingers, each one the length of my forearm. And on its back, its wings. Its fucking wings. Imagine you flip one of those daddy long leg spiders upside down. Now make it 100 times bigger and tape it to your back. They were these skinny, long, maybe 10 feet each, articulating tendrils, and they didn't flap or whatever like a bird's wings. They would just randomly and ever so slightly twitch at the end, one at a time and randomly, not like in sync or anything. Fuck, man. I don't know what that thing is, but I know God didn't make it. Try as I might, I couldn't get any of the other guys to talk about what they saw out there. They'd just as soon forget, I figured. Anyway, they never did find all of Barnes, but here tell, they found pieces of him scattered across all 60 acres in the treetops. A hand here, some intestines there. Never found more than a chunk in any one place. I heard too that Warden sent Barnes's family one of his famous NDAs. Worst part is, he was set to be released in a month. After that, we didn't work on Tower 8 in the dark anymore. We agreed we would rather sweat in the summer heat than come face to face with whatever that thing living in those woods was ever again. Mark then went on to tell my dad about his own run-in with the creature from woods. It takes place where else but the kennels. I asked my dad if he could describe the kennels so you guys and myself could picture them better. He said the building looks like a horse stable almost. There is a dirt hall down the middle, probably 15 feet across, that splits 2 walls lined with metal dog pens, and it's open all the way through with no doors on the ends. He said that at one end past the kennels there are a couple storage closets for dog food and dummies, and between the pens and the closets there are haystacks that they used as cushion for the dogs to lay on. It's an all-wood building with a steep tin roof. Hopefully that provides a good enough image. And with that out of the way, here's what Mark told my dad. One night. Why is it always at night? Anyway, one night I'm out at the kennels getting the dogs and equipment put away. There was only one guard on dog duty that night, and he felt comfortable enough with me that he left me there alone when he had to head back to the main building to use the restroom. I cage the dogs, put the dummies away and pull out the feed, when all the hounds just start whining and whimpering. I feel the hair on back of my neck stand up, and for no reason at all, I'm just frozen. I get this awful feeling in my gut that something's watching me. I work up enough nerve to take a look around, and my eyes are drawn like magnets to the pitch-black tree line in the distance. I can't see anything, but I just know something's there, lurking, observing me, studying me. I stand there in a trance for the longest time, then just snap out of it and start filling the bowls with feed so I can get out of there as fast as possible. I'm about 4 bowls in, and dunt. I hear something hit the roof. I don't mind telling you I wasted no time jumping behind the haystacks and hiding myself as best I could. I hear whatever it is up there on the roof start walking around. This is after the whole ordeal with the convoy at 8, so I have a pretty good idea as to what it might be, and I'm practically pissing my pants. And then dunt, boof. It leaps off the roof, and I hear it land right outside the kennel breezeway. I am just praying to God it doesn't see me. Through a crack between the haystacks, I see its shadow cast across the dirt from the moonlight behind it. The dogs have all gone quiet. I can hear my own heart beating as I see its shadow start walking into the kennel. I see these long, snake-like things, 6 on each side, fold up and retract into its back as it moves further inside. With one arm, it's dragging its hand along the closet walls and then across the metal closet door. It's so loud my ears start ringing, and it sounds like nails on a chalkboard. As it starts to pass me, it stops right in front of the haystacks. I am absolutely losing it inside. It's right in front me, and I can see its skin is this leathery grayish-brown color, and its feet are almost like a raptor's feet. It had 3 black claw-like toes, and it walked upright on the balls of its feet. I hear it sniffing the air, and I'm thinking it's gonna smell me. It's gonna find me and do only God knows what with me. It's leaning into the haystack, sniffing closer and harder. About that time, one the hounds start barking at it. It lets out this terrible screeching noise and just goes ballistic. It's screeching and slamming into the walls and swiping at the steel pen doors. It unfolds the things from its back and flies up, smashing against the roof. It's flying around, hitting everything like a June bug or something. In my head, I'm just praying, please God, please God, please God. Then I see the on-duty guard's headlights shining in the breeze way headed my way. The thing swoops down, snatches up the 100-pound bag of feed, and flies off towards the trees. The guard rushes in gun drawn and finds me hiding in the hay. He said as he was driving up he saw it too and watched it fly away. I just sat there not knowing if I should be glad he'd seen it or not. Makes it harder to tell yourself it was all in your head when someone else sees it happen, too, you know? I used to like being left alone out there, but now anytime he goes to the restroom, I just wait in the squad car. Mark goes on to tell my dad that every now and again he'd come out to the kennels and find the dog food or a haystack missing, the steel pen doors dented in, or everything pulled out from the closets like something had been rummaging through them. Sometimes at night he'd hear the treetops crackling and watch them sway back forth when there wasn't so much as a gust. He said he never came face to face with the creature again, but did have one more terrifying interaction with it by proxy. Mark relays that a few months after his harrowing encounter, he is out at the kennels again, putting away the hounds and dummies. This time the on-duty guard is with him though, and a voice comes through on the guard's walkie. And for the next few minutes, Mark and guard just listen as the calls coming in get increasingly more distressed. Here is what Mark heard over the radio that night. HQ, this CO Green out at Tower 8. Over. A female voice responds. This HQ, go ahead, Tower 8. Over. HQ, something big just crashed into the Tower 8 roof. Were your cameras able to catch what it was? Over. That's a negative, Tower 8. My security cameras do not provide a visual of the tower roof. Over. Another voice comes through. Tower 8, this is Tower 6. I currently have eyes on you. It appears someone is standing on top of Tower 8. Over. Tower 6, this is HQ. Did you say someone is currently on top of Tower 8? Over. This is Tower 6, and that's affirmative, HQ. I have clear visual of someone atop Tower 8. Over. Tower 6, this is Tower 8. You sure you haven't been pulled any of them funny cigarettes out of confiscation? Over. That's a negative, Tower 8. The person in question is now crouching on your tower roof. Over. HQ, this is Tower 8. I'm going to go out on the walk and see if I can take a look. Over. Tower 8, this Tower 6. and I do not recommend that you leave the tower bay. Over. Tower 6, this is Tower 8. Ftink. What the fuck? Tower 8. This is Tower 6. Whoever is on your roof has just jumped down onto the tower walk. I have lost visual. Repeat, I have lost visual. C.O. Green comes back through the walkie, the terror in his voice apparent. It's looking right me. Oh God, it's teeth, Jesus Christ. Tower 8. This is Tower 6. Do not attempt to exit the tower bay. I repeat, do not attempt to exit the tower bay. HQ, this is Tower 8. Boof, boof, boof. It is smashing against the glass. Boof, boof. It's trying to get inside. Jesus, what the fuck is it? Tower 8. This HQ exit through the stairwell. Lock yourself inside. We have officers en route. Officers are en route. Over. Oh God, it broke the glass. Pop, pop, pop. Tower 8. This is HQ, please respond. Over. Repeat. Tower 8. This is HQ, please respond. HQ, this is Tower 6. Something just flew out of the Tower 8 bay and down into the trees, and Jesus Christ, I think it had C.O. Green. Mark then told my dad. A week later, a couple of hikers find a skeleton on some trails about 15 miles out. It was picked clean to the bone. They do a DNA test on the marrow, and lo and behold, it turns out to be C.O. Green. Eventually, my dad and Mark switch gears from the creature in the woods to MSEG, and my dad asks him if anything new had happened since he's been gone. Well, as it just so happened, Mark had in fact heard a few stories and rumors, and he shared them with my dad. I had Buddy who used to work down in the boilers. Anyway, he said sometimes when the evidence locker would get too full, they'd send the old closed cases down to be burned. Well, one day he's purging records and he comes across this box that is absolutely crammed full. He starts wondering how one person could have a file this long, so he sets it aside and decides he'd go through it before he tosses it in the incinerator. He starts rifling through it, reading some of the most awful stuff, and it dawns on him that this file belongs to none other than Voodoo Bob. Now he's really curious, but there is too much to read through and no way he can sneak it all back to his cell, so he just starts scanning for the good stuff. That's when he sees it, Voodoo Bob's diary. He shoves it in his pants, tosses the rest in fire. When he gets back to his cell after his shift, he pops it open and reads it cover to cover. Said the whole thing gave him the willies. Said he wished he'd have just burned it. Anyway, this is what I remember about the diary from what he told me. It was black. One of those spiral 5-subject notebooks, except the metal spiral had been replaced with twine. The margins of every page were filled with little doodles of pentagrams and devils, and Latin phrases he couldn't make out. The first few entries was Voodoo talking about how remorseful he was for killing his mom, about the voices in his head that told him to do it, and how he was glad he was finally alone and the voices couldn't talk him anymore. But as the days went on, the entries started getting darker. He started talking about how the voices had followed him to his cell in Seg, how every night from the shadows in the corner of his room something would speak to him from the void, tell him to do things, terrible things. He said sometimes the thing would float down out of the darkness and hover over him while he slept. Voodoo came to believe that it wanted to use him as a host, and as months passed he was getting tired of fighting it, of trying to keep it out. He writes this entry one day saying that he planned to give his soul to the demon that night. After that, every page was inked in his own blood and seemed to just be nonsense and incantations and sketches of demonic beings. Every once in a while, though, in the corner of a page there would be, written in pen, the words, "Help me." My friend in the boilers figures that Voodoo was still in there somewhere, trapped inside himself, begging to be set free as this demonic force took control. Now, whether that thing followed Voodoo to M or if it had been lurking there the whole time waiting for someone vulnerable enough to feed on, I don't know. But I think whatever is in those walls, at least a part of it, is Voodoo. Anyway, a few years ago they shut down MSEG indefinitely. Now if you walk down the Seg wing, you'll see it taped off with caution tape and crucifixes hanging all over the door. People say a guy wound up in M, and somehow the thing tricked him into completely removing the vent cover. The thing crawls out from the wall and eats him alive, and the guy just lets it do it, doesn't yell or anything. A guard come the next day to bring him chow and sees him all chewed up, laying lifeless on the cell room floor. And when he looks up, he sees the thing from the vent crawling upside down across the ceiling. Priests rush down the run and try and coheres it back to the vent from outside the cell, but it's too strong now. It's been fed. It's full. All they can do is bless every square inch of M outside 13's door and pray it can't get out. My buddy who cleans down in Seg says, if you look through the block window, you can see its shadow from under the cell door pacing back and forth. On the M run. After hearing what Mark had to say, I asked my dad if he had ever had to purge evidence himself when he worked in the boilers. Oh yeah, he said. About every 6 months or so, they'd wheel a cart full of boxes of papers and files and have us burn them. I followed up by asking if he'd ever found anything interesting like Voodoo's diary. You'd see things inmates had used to off someone with a shank, a piece of wire, a razor. We'd get pictures, too, of the crime scenes or of contraband that they'd confiscated and where they'd found it. I guess the craziest thing I ever saw were the voodoo dolls, probably. Voodoo Bobs? I asked. No, Voodoo Bob wasn't. The only one in Telford practicing witchcraft, you know. In fact, there was a whole cult of warlocks or Wiccans or whatever you want to call them. The voodoo doll was one of theirs. They used it as weapon during the Holy Wars. I then asked him to back up a little and explain to me what he meant by Holy Wars. All right. Well, when I was working in the boilers the prison was going through, what we just started calling the Holy Wars. There was this group of fanatical Christians, and they had taken it upon themselves to start a crusade against this cult of people who liked to dabble in witchcraft. It started with just verbal altercations, but escalated into this violent struggle that must have lasted a good 2 months. The first real bad incident happened when guards checked the showers one day and find one of the cultists hanging from the shower head with his throat slit and a piece of cardboard staples to his chest with some Bible verse about blasphemy written on it. Few days later, another guard opens a cell next to an inmate who says he heard his neighbor shouting, and they find him in their arms, legs, and head, all severed and his torso split right up the middle. But it doesn't make any sense because he bunked alone and his cell door had been locked whole time. Well, the false prophets are certain it was done using some sort of witchcraft, so they even the score by baptizing 3 of the warlocks, indefinitely in the toilets inside their cells. The inmate who usually wheeled down the evidence to the boilers happened to be one of the cultists. He wheels us in a fresh load not long after the drownings, and sitting on top of the boxes are these 3 rope dolls. Me and my coworker don't think anything about it other than they looked kind of creepy, so we start tossing the contents of the cart into the blaze. Not a minute later, all the fire alarms start going off. The guard supervising us leads us out onto the yard where all the other inmates are lined up. We start asking around, trying to figure out if anybody knows what's going on, and someone tells us that a few of those fanatics were standing around preaching to the mice, and out of nowhere they just burst into flames. After they do an investigation, they say one of the guys just spontaneously combusted and wound up setting the other 2 on fire. But I know it had to be those dolls, and some kind black magic was responsible. But I don't want the same thing happening to me, so I decide to just keep my mouth shut and mind my own business. I asked him if he ever talked about it later with his co-worker in the boiler room, and he got quiet and this somber look washed over him. With Boogie? No, I don't think that man even comprehended that kind of evil existed in the world. He was always happy, always dancing. That's why I used to call him the Boogeyman. Boogie was a black guy, and when I first got to prison I hated black people. My old gang was a bunch of rednecks and skinheads, and I think I just started hating them to show off or something, and eventually I convinced that I actually did. When I came prison, my hatred just got worse. Everyone is separated, segregated, everyone sees color first. Except for Boogie, he just saw people. He was sent there on drug charges, got addicted to crack, and couldn't kick habit. But he was a good guy, super friendly, and upbeat, the type of person that wouldn't hurt a fly. I start in the boilers and realize my co-worker is this cheery black man, and I ask for a job transfer immediately, but it gets denied. At first, I just ignored him as he keeps talking to me every day like he thinks we are friends or something. He'd get some coal on his shovel, do a little twist, and toss it in the boiler. It was like he didn't see I hated him. Or maybe he did. Maybe. That's why he was so persistent. "Hi, boss, why you so down today? Don't you know God made the stars?" Everybody was boss, everybody was good. Eventually, I started talking back to him out of boredom or loneliness or curiosity maybe. And the more we talked, the more I realized that this was one of the most genuine people I'd ever met, and I had hated him solely because he was different color than me. That night I get to my cell and just pray to God for God to make me colorblind, to take the hatred I'd been carrying all these years out of me. Next day I go to the boilers and I see Boogie, but now he's just a person. I see him like he sees me for the first time, like a human being with a soul and dreams. I start thinking about this swastika tattooed on my arm that Boogie has to look at every day. I try to apologize for it and for the way I used to be. And he looks at me and says, "Hey boss, don't sweat it, man. We all make mistakes. I ain't know I like macaroni till I ate macaroni, you dig? That tattoo don't make you who you are any more than my skin makes me who I am." At this point, tears start falling from my dad's eyes. And it's the first time I have ever him cry, so I tell him we can talk about something else, but he just continues. The worst thing, the absolute worst thing you can do to someone that hates you is let them see you happy. Well, there is a lot of hate in prison, and it's always looking at the worst thing. One day I come down into Boiler and Boogie's not there. I start thinking maybe he's sick or something and figure I'd check on him after my shift was through. Well, I start smelling this awful burning smell coming from the other side of the boiler, and I tell the guard I'm gonna have a look and see if something had fell against the casing. I walk around and leaning against the searing casing of the boiler is Boogie.